Welcome back to the Brandon Joe podcast. Our guest today is Dr. Randy Lim. He received his PhD in applied organizational psychology from Hofstra University, has previous experience as an adjunct professor at Hofstra University, and is currently a global director of org science and analytics, McKinsey Company. Welcome, Randy. Thanks for joining us today.
Hey, thanks for having me here, and glad to be on the podcast.
I guess before we get started into the fun IO stuff of it, I know when we were emailing back and forth, you just came back from, what was it, like a 2-3 week climbing trip, mountain trip? How
Well,
could I explain it?
yeah. I had a wedding in Denver, and so I kind of did the whole like national park, national monument trip around Colorado, and so we went to Dinosaur National Monument, which is amazing, and it's really this cool place where you can get the national park annual pass. And we're big advocates for the national park, but they you can buy an annual pass. They usually punch it like when you actually buy your pass. It goes along the entire year. But when they give you a hole punch, it's not a normal hole punch. It's actually a dinosaur punch, and so it's like a little dinosaur on the on your pass. But we went there. We went to Black Canyons. We went to Mesa Verde, and then we went to the Great Sand Dunes. Pretty great trip. We also saw some like natural hot springs and kind of sat there for a while. They're just like right in the public park too, and like you just sit in this like random like pond, and it's hot, and it's really great. But along with that, we just did a bunch of hikes and saw some great friends, and yeah, it was good to kind of get away from work for a little bit.
It's so awesome. I know I'm from the West Coast, and the nature on the West Coast just is so great. And I wish that we had that over here on the East Coast. Did you get the chance to go to a place in Colorado called the Garden of the Gods? That's like right. I think it's in Colorado Springs. It's like right below Denver. It's really, really pretty.
Oh, we did go. Well, we went there 4 years ago, so we didn't make it this time around. But we did stop in a Jamaican restaurant near that area, and it was like kind of like this really, really kind of gritty type of area where we had to park our car right next to the restaurant. And I was meeting my one of my best friend's fiance for the first time, and it was essentially a place that where you could probably maybe encounter some uh ruffians at points. And so she we struck him in this place. It was really great food, and she met me. She's like, okay, I think they come from a pretty proper family, so when they came there, like, yep, I understand why you're friends with this guy. He's kind of weird, but it's really good food.
I gotta get more cultured. I don't know any of this stuff. I'm from, I was born and raised, we were just talking about, I can't escape the greater Long Island area. But this sounds like a fun trip. I got to, well, SIOP now is in Denver, right?
Yep, next year.
I think the next one. Maybe I'll skip some sessions and take a look.
Extend your trip, man. Like, they take the week off of work and go hiking.
That's what I hear a lot of people do. And like I know some people said they might like go skiing, and I was like, I feel like I gotta do that because I feel like the last time it was like just the sessions that I left. I was like, I'm not experiencing Chicago.
How many sessions do you typically go to? Like, let's say like last year, right? How many sessions did you go to throughout the 3 days or 4 days?
What do you think, Brandon? Because I feel like we go to most of them together.
Yeah.
Um,
I know for sure we try to get to at least 2 or 3 a day. Sometimes like we'll go and we'll like set our schedule, and then we'll get pulled into something with someone, and then our day just kind of is at the wind. But I feel like Joe, we probably try at least two a day for sure.
yeah,
Would you
two,
agree?
2 to 3. I think if you see some friends at the hotel bar, don't sit down next to them because that means you're not going to any sessions for the rest of the day. We made
Yeah,
that
that got
mistake
us a few
once.
times. Yeah.
Um, but yeah, no, I think, and it's actually a good talking point too, because I think when we were first year master students in our first SIOP, we jam packed it. We're
Yep.
waking up at the ass crack of dawn, and we also lived. This is a whole nother story. We lived like 40 minutes from the SIOP conference, which was terrible. Yeah, I know,
Oh
it was
Yeah, that
no.
was
terrible.
so bad.
And you try to jam pack everything, and by the time it's night and you want to go like actually network and like meet other people, I'm like, I'm exhausted. I want to eat and like go home. Um, I don't know. What's your experience with that, Randy? Do you try to jam pack it, or do you go to like a couple and do some other fun stuff?
I think I kind of like follow like the same kind of blueprint that you do. Like earlier on, I would try to jam pack it. I'm waking up at 8 o'clock, and I'm hoping that I can make each session. But then after a while, like no, like where like what I go for style for is really the networking. And so like yeah, you'll pick and choose like interesting sessions, but by far and large, it's like, hey, you're just sitting at the hotel bar, or like you just see somebody you kind of met a long time away. Hey, like let's quickly like chat. This time around, and I ran into um one of my friends, Eleonora. She works, I believe, for Block in Seattle, and it was like a 3 p.m. I'm walking down the street, and I see her, and I'm like, hey, I know you. And we started chatting, and we ended up playing trivia at a bar with some of my colleagues, and we ended up winning. And
Oh, wow.
a few sessions, and it was great. But all its points, like, yeah, I agree. Like, hey, like the session, like it's a great place to kind of meet each other. You learn some things, but really the connectivity and networking is where it's at.
Yeah, and I also noticed some value. And Randy, you've been to a few more than Joe and I. Like, let us know your thoughts here. Like, I noticed some value also in like supporting colleague sessions. So, like, I would go to a few sessions where I knew people who were speaking on research they were doing, and that to me was actually really interesting because you're kind of learning what the people around you are kind of involved in. Like, have you had any experience? And I know McKinsey has a lot does a lot of research in general, so I'm sure everybody's pretty heavily involved.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like always like kind of like showing your support always like matters. Even like from selfishly from my session, I had an Ignite session last time. It was pretty early. I think it was like 9 a.m. on the first day, and we did like a from zero to hero, like building an external facing people analytics unit from scratch. And I did this with like former boss and a few other people analytics leaders from different like various companies. But uh, at least like for that, we had like kind of a good showing of people from McKinsey, but also folks from Hofstra, and then some folks just from like the local like New York IO area kind of show up. And it meant a lot because it's like, hey, like these are the friends that I know, and they kind of get to see the work that I do, but then also kind of help kind of permeate the message of like, hey, why does our field matter? And how do we kind of make fun out of it? Even for myself, like whenever I always ask my friends, like, hey, what are the list of like projects you have and or kind of sign-up sessions that you have, and I'll try to kind of attend them. It just, yeah, you do like learn like what is kind of going on in the industry. I often feel like sometimes academics can be a bit too theoretical in nature, but when you like hear like some of the practitioners kind of talk about what are they kind of experiencing, what are they doing, you get a flavor of like, all right, what's becoming like kind of trending in the area, and what are kind of the things that I need to know and kind of take back to kind of my work.
So when you go and like speak at like a PsyOp event, are you then speaking on behalf of McKinsey, or is it your own research with friends, or is it kind of like a bit of both?
Depends who sponsors you.
Okay, yeah.
But I've had situations where like Hofstra would sponsor me to go and I'd present research that I was doing at the time. I used to work with Stephanie Boucher. She used to work in the institutional research office at Hofstra, and so I'd present some research on what we were doing in terms of like institutional research. How do you do accreditation? I've also been like sponsored for my master's program as well. We're doing research on like break taking. But then also the firm will also tend to like sponsor you in terms of areas that you've done research on. And so for us, we had a huge focus on like DE and I, people analytics, culture, and purpose. And so they're kind of the areas that we know the most about and we feel most comfortable talking about. And so you're going to talk a lot about that type of research. But sometimes kind of plug into like kind of odds and ends like type of projects. This last cycle we I got asked to be a part of like the early careers symposium. And so that when you're talking a bit like you're kind of like what's your pathway and like sort of commonalities of like kind of success factors that kind of set us up for success long term.
No, that's it's really cool. Like, I think this is actually a good segue to kind of talk about your work at McKinsey. But before we get into that, like hearing about the idea of conducting research with friends or doing it with your like work colleagues, I think is just a really cool part of the IO field. Like we kind of get to be in this world no matter what we're doing. And like that was a good example of like talking about how you could get sponsorship from a lot of different areas. You have your Hofstra people, you have just like people that you know around PsyOp, and then you have McKinsey. But Randy, like one thing that I'm wondering now is the like transition to talking about McKinsey. When you're like doing your research, is there a different process for when you're doing research for something like PsyOp versus maybe like the type of work that you're doing at McKinsey? Like, are you following the same process for that?
Yeah, I think you kind of like follow the same process of like kind of a scientific method, right? Like, hey, like try to see what kind of trends are out there and kind of continuing on the research. I think the biggest difference though is like the time factor. When you're in a university setting, like man, like my dissertation took like 4 or 5 years to do. And that's not uncommon. Like folks will take like a year to validate their survey. You have like scarce resources, but in industry, you kind of don't have that luxury. You probably have like maybe like a few weeks tops to do that, but you
Right.
do have a lot more resources available to you, and so you're able to kind of almost like get the data and support that you need a lot quicker than if you had to go kind of like through the bureaucratic processes of like academia. Because academia, you have to like get approval just to get like $1,000 hopefully down the line in order to like get participants from like enter. And within the industry, you afford a lot more access to like resources. Like you could potentially run a survey with your entire organization. You have access to a lot of academic articles, you have access to experts in the field. Like we were able to talk to a number of different CHROs, CEOs that I just did not have access as like a student. In the practical world, you're able to like, hey, like I need to go talk to the CHRO of X company. Is somebody know somebody I can talk to in order to kind of get that information? And so you're able to get that a lot quicker. I also say that the programs that you have access to are going to be a lot more sophisticated than you are in school, just because, like, hey, I'm in school. Like, when I was in school, I was really scrappy. Like, I remember, like, getting spaghetti out of, tomato sauce out of a spaghetti can and having to put it back in and save it for later, which is like maybe not the, maybe not the most sanitary thing, but like, I had to do it because I just did not have the resources. But now I'm like, hey, I have the newest edition of like ChatGPT that I can use that I can help leverage in order to make my assumptions a lot quicker or like create code that I normally wouldn't be able to do. You have access to, I guess like all the kind of new like software programs. You have access to visualizations I just did not have access to as, when I was in school. But you kind of take that scrappiness with you, but you just have a lot more resources to make it a lot quicker. I'd also say there's a lot more focus on impact. Uh, I think typically in academia, you're focusing on like the impact factors are usually like what satisfaction, engagement, but then it's like, well, what does that actually mean? What does that actually lead to? And so when you're kind of interested, okay, what's the business case behind it? What's the impact on financials? What's the impact on potential revenue growth? Also, like, kind of what's the impact on societal factors? How's the impact on DE&I? So you're almost taking like a 360 view of what the impact is, rather than just like satisfaction or engagement or what have you. Just the focus is going to be a lot more impact oriented than if you were in academia.
I like that end piece because it's interesting, right? When you're in school, sometimes you have that like tunnel vision almost, and you're like, I'm just looking at this like one factor and see how it affects. Um, but when you're working at an organization, and like you just said, there's so many other things that it can affect. And you have to worry about like a company's financials and the culture at the time, like all these different things that you kind of get thrown out the window when you're working in a classroom. When you're working at McKinsey, are you doing internal research for the organization, or is it more for a client, or is it kind of like a little bit of both?
Yeah, a great question here. In my current role, I almost like play a dual threat of that I do a lot of work internal and a lot of work external as well. Um, and so it's like almost like twofold, right? So the first part's like foremost, I always like try to apply like data to what we're doing to drive like business decisions. So for a lot of the internal work, could be anything around how do we think about our comp structure moving forward? How do we think about culture internally? How do we think about our talent needs? How do we even think about like development for our lowest level, or I say, so it's like our entry level employees to like folks who've been here for like 40 years. And so a lot of like kind of things internals, like what I'll focus on, especially things that require hardcore analytics and academic knowledge, especially around like the org and people space. But I also kind of do that for clients as well. And so our clients will oftentimes have to think through the whole gamut of the talent pipeline, everything from what do you think about operational workforce planning, strategic workforce planning, to how do you attract and source and onboard like kind of this talent. And after that, like what's their experience throughout the line? And so everything from the talent life cycles we typically help clients from, whether it's folks in manufacturing, folks in insurance, folks in tech. So you have like the same kind of talent life cycle, but it looks different in each industry. And oftentimes their problems will be similar, but also very different. In tech, for example, you're typically want to hire the best talent no matter where it is. In manufacturing, you're hiring the best talent at the location. Uh, and so, maybe not just looking for like, the best of the best, but you're looking for someone that can actually kind of get the job done and come in and come out. And so having kind of a dual lens helps out because they kind of feed one another. Because what if you see that are like kind of opportunities, but also like best practices and kind of that's kind of happening out there in the industry, you're able to take it back to like internal. It's like, hey, I've seen this type of work, kind of work. But let me try this out. But then also, it's working internally. You can try that externally as well. So they kind of feed each other. So you see, like, you're diagnosing, like, all right, what are the common pitfalls that I see? But what are also the things that really work very well? Like for example, one kind of emerging trend that I'm seeing right now, at least for like blue collar work right now, is this sense of flexible workforce scheduling. Previously before, I was like, hey, you know what, Brandon, Joe, Randy, you're coming in like Monday through Friday from 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. every day. You might have to work overtime. But that's like kind of shifting a bit now with like kind of technology, and we've seen it work with different industries where maybe sometimes like we need flexibility here. Like Brandon, you might want to play pickleball one day. Joe, you might want to go fishing another day. I'm just making this up too. Like,
I caught a fish once. This is a good story.
How'd you know I was a pickleball coach, Randy?
really? Are you going to say pickleball club?
I was a pickleball coach for quite some time.
Oh my gosh! Well, we have a lot to talk about because I am a very strong beginner. So
Once you get back, I not to derail us because I think everything you're saying here is so great, Randy. And I like one thought that's coming to my mind in terms of like you're talking about all this industry knowledge and like applying the research. Obviously, like getting your master's and PhD prepared you to like conduct research and use a scientific method. When you kind of got into McKinsey and you're now conducting research like this, what prepared you for like learning the industry language or like learning the stuff in tech or learning like all the different parts of what actually happens when you get into the working world? Because I feel like that's kind of sometimes as an IO psychologist where we might struggle, where it's like we get so heavy in the research. Like, so what did you do to prepare for that, the business aspect of what you do?
oh, really great question here. I'd probably say the biggest thing was actually just being curious all the time. What kind of mean to IO was um, at my school they got rid of trays to get like lunch, and I felt that was like really annoying. So I had to like hold all these bowls like your lunch seat. I was like, well, why do they do that? Oh, they're actually saving like conserving water because it seems like I'm grabbing more plates than I would normally do if I were to grab a tray. And they called like Trayless Tuesdays. They experimented with it. It's like, oh, it works. We're gonna like expand it out to the entire week. And I was like, that doesn't seem right. But I'm gonna do like kind of a quick experiment. And I did this for like my class project of, all right, on days where I get a tray, I'm grabbing like 2.5 plates, 1.5 cups. On days that I do not have that, I am grabbing 3.5 like bowls, 1.5 plates, 2.5 cups, and I'm creating a mess on the table. So that calculate how much water is kind of getting used to do that. Like as opposed to a tray, like hey, the delta doesn't make sense here. Like you should not get rid of trays. It's because it actually saves me a lot more space. You're able to wash and so on and so forth. And so I was able to like say, all right, cool. Like doesn't make much sense. And so that kind of got me kind of prepared for this role. It's like, hey, a lot of the experiments that you do, you have to figure out what's the value at stake. And so I was able to quickly kind of understand like, hey, what's the KPI that's kind of involved? And in that situation, it was water, like big conserve. So you kind of take that experimental mindset into your role as well. It's like, all right, cool. What's the thing that matters? What's the goal that you're trying to achieve by doing X thing? And so I think that's like kind of what prepared me. Also, I just like do a plethora of like different kind of experiences. I used to work at like Circuit City, which went bankrupt. I also we used to work at Marshall Fields, which also went bankrupt. And so like, yeah, I kind of learned from those experiences, like, what does it mean to be like on the front line? But I also used to work at Costco and Panera, and they gave me kind of experiences that I took to my role as well. Like, man, like, working in a stock room, working in like the alcohol section, and you kind of like learn those type of things, and then just kind of staying curious. I like to look at the news quite a bit. So like, I think all of us are kind of on LinkedIn. On the right hand, they have like LinkedIn news. I'm like, hey, like what are some of these companies doing innovation with like AI, for example, right? Like how are they looking for attracting and sourcing our folks? How are they thinking about recruiting? Is it, are they using it to design? Are they using AI to select candidates? Like, nope, that's too much of a risk. That's becoming kind of an industry to kind of help use it to design like job descriptions that kind of aim towards different generations. Like, oh, that's actually pretty cool. Like, we should probably go do that. And so, like, kind of staying curious and trying new experiences has gotten me a long way. And then also just like talking to people. I think you guys are doing a kind of a great job. When you talk to people in like different industries, you get a flavor like what's kind of working, where they're kind of like pain points, and kind of how they talk about it as well. And so just through kind of like communicating and talking, it's also been like kind of helpful to kind of learn what different kind of industries like go through.
I feel like a lot of people in IO have those like defining work experiences, working at companies that may have gone bankrupt, or good bosses versus bad bosses, and like having those experiences in your pocket where you're like, oh, I kind of want to know why this stuff is happening. So it's interesting to hear, because we hear that as like a repetitive thought behind why people got into this industry in general. Um, Now that you've made it to out of school, and now that you're working at an organization, do you find yourself being able to still use those IO aspects, even at a company like McKinsey, which I know most probably IOs have heard of? Or is it still tough to like be like, oh, like I've used this IO knowledge in school, can I bring it here? And I know we briefly touched upon the difference in research, but just like the general IO knowledge, I was wondering about.
Early on, I would say I'm not really sure. Like, will it be important in the real world? Probably not. But now that I've been here a while, I can say it with an astounding yes. It's incredibly valuable now. Like, whatever you call it, it translates to like so many different things. Every organization kind of has like very similar problems, right? As long as your organization relies on people, you need someone with an IO background there. Whether that's going to be in HR, in operations, or even finance, someone has to be there to understand like what, from a people standpoint, what people do you need coming in? What's the culture? What does that look like? What's the leadership type you need? What's the right way to assess and select people? And so I would just say, like, if there ever is an organization that needs people, you need someone who specializes in what we are able to do, in order for them to like reach their business goals. Because we've seen what happens when they don't do it. On the news, you see about things around like hybrid workforce, for example. The transition from COVID, from when we're hybrid, and what does that look like? But even the opposite happens. Like, what happens when you want everyone to come back into the office? How much does like pay or compensation sort of impact worker productivity? Without having one of us folks there, you won't be able to sort of make sense of the data. A classic thing I love to kind of share is that um, there's a well-known case out there of using like mathematics slash AI and to figure out how do you select people, and they relied on folks who were essentially not experts in the space. They found out a few things. One, bonuses did not matter for retention. People named Jared and played lacrosse were most likely to be successful. And yeah, I mean, they're like, okay, cool. We think the lacrosse thing is there. I mean, with the Jared thing, and bonuses, we can kind of decrease that a bit. Devastating, absolutely devastating on their people. And that was just like from a pure mathematic play of like, hey, we just had people who just do math really well. On flip of the coin, you have a lot of folks who do people operations who don't necessarily have the expertise to do it, and they'll implement like really, really odd and kind of crazy things of like if seeing how things work. Such as, for example, um, I've seen situations where people will have um, interviewers who don't actually do the work doing interviews, and there is no sense of like interview guides, and there's no way to like assess skill set, like skills. The questions aren't grounded or anything. It's kind of based on intuition, and so you kind of see like a bit of like a kind of an issue on like performance there. And so absolutely the IO kind of background matters, especially in the industry, and I think it's becoming increasingly more so that's the specializations needed.
Yeah, it's interesting hearing all those different stories, and I feel like keeping up on current work trends is so important in our field, like more than a lot of others, because I feel like as things grow and as things change, Joe and I talk about AI a lot on here, but you mentioned something there, Randy, about like returning to the office or going hybrid or going more remote. Like, there's kind of like both of those shifts and trends happening right now, where some places are bringing everybody back in, and some places are like, okay, we don't need to be in the office as much. And just wondering from your experience, Randy, like as you kind of work with clients or grow that expertise, do you see, um, are there any like other trends or things that you're seeing in the research you're doing or the work you're doing that are good for us IOs to know as we enter the workforce?
No, I think you did a great job with like kind of recognizing like the hybrid work. I think that's kind of a big topic now with like Amazon's like return to office policies. You
Mhm.
mentioned Gen AI, which is like pretty like getting the use case for it. They're starting to build a lot of like use cases of like how it's most important. Uh, and like maybe it's just like for me focusing quite a bit on like talent is around operational and strategic workforce planning. That one is I think quite relevant and becoming increasingly a lot of organizations are like noticing the demand for and like why it's important because I mean critical skills change every like the critical skills for each job changes every 4 to 5 years. And so there'll be that one defining skill set that makes a role successful or not successful. And in order for organizations to stay competitive, they really need to understand like, hey, what are the people and skill sets I need for today, for tomorrow, the next 5 years, the next 10 years, and that is a big area. But doing it wrong can also be detrimental. I'm very critical around a lot of things, but I attended a session like this past PSYOP on SW like strategic workforce planning, and I remember one of the speakers said, "You don't need analytics for SWP." And I like almost walked out of the session right there, like, wait, you do none? What do you rely on? Like pixie sticks and magic dust? Like, what is going on here? And I was like, what? This is crazy. But
There's our episode quote.
but this topic is so important, right? You have like some of the titans in industry who think about this day in, day out. And you the big tech companies just look at their like look who's working there. The news recent hires. It's around workforce planning. Look at the profiles. It's a mix of IOs and data scientists with with a human capital slash human operations background. It's an area that if you don't know what your workforce will look like in the future, you're gonna fail. You're not gonna have like kind of the right talent needed to succeed. I always view talent sort of like the vehicle that you take to get your goal. Are you gonna get there by walking? Are you gonna get there by taking a bike? Are you gonna get there by taking a car? It's up to you, but how you kind of determine that is like your workforce planning.
Yeah, it's a good point. And saying no analytics to an IO is like a stake in the heart. So I'm surprised you heard that.
At PSYOP.
Uh, yeah.
Yes.
But you bring up some interesting points, and uh, it's it's interesting to hear your most like the things that students should hear about the most, and research most is work for strategic planning. And I like that you brought it up because I remember sometimes in classes we would talk about like current events in school, and we would hear about like, oh, I think WeWork went bankrupt, and that was
Mhm.
like a top of a conversation, and hear about like how they were strategic planning, and well, I guess they did. But it's definitely a prominent topic that we should be focusing on, especially as early career practitioners, as hopefully we have some input into like some of these decisions.
Joe, Joe also just butting in. We also
Yeah.
filmed one of our podcast episodes in a WeWork. So
Well,
the we the WeWork bankruptcy really hit us hard.
we wanted that that information right at the source.
It hit us hard.
But yeah, Ren, you gave us a lot of interesting topics that we got to discuss today, but we want to end off with our last question that we ask all our guests. Do you have any bits of advice that you can give to students or early career practitioners as they enter the workforce and begin their IO journey?
Yeah, I think absolutely. I think probably the biggest advice is like just show like kind of grit and perseverance through everything. It's not easy. You'll fail like a lot. It's really hard. I know right now in this current environment to like find a role, but I think like through every failure you kind of learn um how to do things kind of the right way. And so like kind of even for me, I'd never been denied an interview, like got rejected from an interview before. But early on in my like internship, I think I got denied like twice, and then it really hit me hard. But you have to keep on trying. I think you'll kind of find something, and so to like keep persevering because sometimes when a door closes, another one opens up. So we're kind of all in this journey together, and don't kind of lose hope. I just gotta kind of keep it going and keep networking is also kind of another thing too. It's like, hey, like you don't know who you're gonna meet at like some random event somewhere. Or if I can I share how I got to the McKinsey?
Gladly.
Please.
Cool.
Yeah, gladly.
So, I think many folks, like, I was like in my master's program, about to go into my doctorate's program, or maybe right for my doctorate's program, and there was a session held by one of our Hofstra alums who's amazing. Her name's Lindsay Pike. She's great, and she was giving the session, and she worked at McKinsey at the time, and very popular. She had like 25 people around her poster session, and just like she's doing like a great presentation. And I was there, I was reading, I was like really curious, and I actually started talking to her mom for about like just like random things. Like, oh, cool, like, hey, like, your daughter's like, who are you? She's like, oh, this is my daughter. She's really proud. And I started talking to her for a while, and the session's over. Didn't get to talk to Lindsay, and then an internship popped up at McKinsey, and my girlfriend at the time broke up with me, so I was not going back to Milwaukee. I was like, all right, I gotta stay here, like in New York and Long Island. I know you guys love Long Island. Did not like it. I live in Hempstead, kind of the worst area of
I
Hempstead.
That's
agree.
fair. That's fair.
I'm with you, Randy. I'm with you.
But when the internship like kind of popped up, I spoke with, I just cold emailed like Lindsay. I was like, hey Lindsay, I don't know if you remember me, but I saw you posted about this internship. Really interested in it. Would love to like talk with you and learn more. And she replies back, Randy, my mom loves you. Yes, let's chat. And I chatted with her and got like a recommendation from a reference from her and Dr. Liu for the role. So, uh, yeah, you don't know, just keep networking. It's not something that's really easy. It doesn't come natural to me. And I kind of like practically how do I network, and so but just getting yourself out there is like half the battle.
Yeah, I think it's good that we have this conversation. The last few episodes we've done, it seems like this conversation keeps coming up because I think a lot of people are struggling with the market right now, and just hearing things like having grit and perseverance is so helpful for people out there looking for a job. But also, it's just like an intangible that is going to help you in your career regardless, which is kind of what you referred to there, Randy. It's like the fact that you are going to push through, persevere, and kind of try to get results and do what you can, and do it in a bunch of different ways. Like networking is just one of the ways you can show grit and persevere through maybe a tough job market. So, like the way that you kind of broke that down, Randy, is really awesome. And I think that as students or early career IOs, the market will settle down at some point, and people will be able to actually have a fairer chance and an easier chance at finding jobs. And so, hearing that I think is really great from your perspective. And then your anecdote about how you got into McKinsey shows that like as one door closes, another one opens. Because if you were looking for internships, like you said earlier, and then you took one of those, you might not have been in the position to end up at McKinsey, and you've been there for over 9 years now. So everything happens for a reason, and like it's really awesome to kind of hear stories like that as somebody who is a student and recently graduated, and I know other students out there listening are going to appreciate that too.
No, it's a great synthesis. I thought you were gonna say, oh, because your girlfriend broke up with you, you end up in McKinsey.
Well, that's a different door that closed.
I could ditto that same statement. I remember there was a couple internships I didn't get, and I was a bit bummed out. And then the internship that I did end up getting ended up turning into my current role, which I couldn't be happier about. So you're 1000% right that in the moment sometimes you're like this sucks. I really wanted that job, um, but I truly believe that there's something better around the corner that ends up being your quote unquote dream job or the one that you should have done.
Yeah,
So
I
yes,
want to
man.
add, Joe. I
Yeah.
remember when we were early on in the program, and Joe and I both applied to the same internship, and we both didn't get it, and we were both like, "Dang, that sucks." And like the fact is like we were both a little bummed out by it, but then like the opportunity that came afterwards, like you were saying there, Joe, like it's funny in that moment it felt so big, and we were both like, "Oh man!" And I remember us hopping before podcast talking about that, and then to look at where we are a year and a half later, I feel like it's just like you don't even realize it in the moment, you know?
No, you never know.
But Randy, we want to thank you so much for your time today. I feel like Joe and I get the opportunity to talk to so many people around IO, and it's so cool because I mean we were saying on your 78 episodes down, like we still hear something new every time. So like hearing the experience that you've had, the types of research you're doing, it's really really cool, and like we can tell that the experience you get at McKinsey is something that will help a lot of us learn from you and help you in your career too. So we really appreciate you kind of coming on here and kind of teaching us what you get to do on a daily basis.
Yeah, and likewise, like thank you for like amplifying the voice of like IOs to everyone else. And like IO is still kind of a niche term. People kind of know what we do, but didn't maybe necessarily know like what the title is. And so thank you both for really doing a great job of like kind of getting the IO name out there. So thank you for having me on
Yeah.
here.
Appreciate it, Randy. Thanks for coming on.
Awesome. Thank you.
That was a great episode with Randy. I think it was kind of cool. We got to talk about so many different topics, and like I think that kind of really showcases McKinsey as a whole, because McKinsey, you have to be a subject matter expert and like understand research and learn about all these different industries. So like I feel like that kind of fit with the conversation we had with Randy, don't you think so?
Yeah, I mean, just talking to Randy, you can tell that he's super knowledgeable um, in his area. And then getting to hear about his experience and his advice, especially his advice at the end, which we've heard echoed. But I like the piece about like not getting internships, and then ultimately it ends up well because you get the one that you're probably supposed to get. Um, just overall, it was a great time talking to Randy.
Yeah, thank you again, Randy, for coming on here, and thank you guys for listening. I know this 2 a week is starting to feel long, but stick with us. We're going to do a bunch more. So thank you guys for listening.